Hi, I'm Melissa Smith.
I'm Spencer Ziegler, and welcome to Data Lit, podcast by educators for educators. So last episode, Melissa and I chatted about some research on collecting and using perception data. So this episode, we want to follow up to kind of see what this looks like in practice, what this means in a school. So for that, we're thrilled to be joined by Juley Sexton, principal at Combs Magnet Elementary School. Juley, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, guys. Thank you for having me today. I'm really honored to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So can you tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a native to Wake County. I am a product of the Wake County Public School System myself.
Oh,
I am born and bred, as they say, from Fuquay-Varina. Went to school through there, kindergarten, graduated from Fuquay High School. Went on to get my undergrad degree at Meredith College here in Raleigh. So I didn't leave Wake County really much at all. I've been married for 25 years this June, which is crazy to think about.
Congratulations.
Family. Oh, been a fun joyride, but and I'm a mom of three. I have a 21, 18-year-old and 13-year-old. College, high school, and middle school. So life keeps us pretty busy, but it's a joy to be surrounded with people that I love and that encourage me along the journey as well.
Thank you. So when we think about analyzing data, in order to analyze data, you kind of have to need data to analyze. And sometimes that might be a barrier for folks especially when thinking about perception data, because you're relying on other people to kind of give you data. So what are some strategies that you've used to increase participation rates when it comes to like your student or family or teacher surveys?
I think one key word that I try to live by is intentionality.
Good.
Specifically in the principal role, intentional about how we advertise surveys and data to collect, but also how do we receive it very intentionally, and then how do we share it really intentionally? I think for parent survey data, we think about here in Wake County Public Schools, the Panorama Survey, we are very intentional in how we advertise that. So when we're long-term planning, even school events, we take in consideration when the Panorama Survey is open. So how do we utilize those school events that are happening during the day and in the evening to promote parents to complete Panorama surveys? Leave up iPads and QR codes and laptops so parents can do it right then and there, or they can at least quickly scan a QR code to complete that too. So that has been a really useful tool for us. I think also for all three areas of population, students, parents, and teachers, we constantly share updates of how many have completed the survey.
Nice.
We're at 250 out of 700 families, or 93% of our staff have completed this survey. So I think that provides an awareness, and we share that our end goal is 100%. We want all families, all students, all teachers. And so we're not just waiting for the end to give the autopsy report of how many have completed it, but what does that look like along the way? But I think most importantly, you talk about perception data. Someone's perception is their reality.
Yes.
And so I can't always argue with that. But what I can do is, how do I respond to the data, particularly perception data? And I think about in this case, particularly from our teachers. I can't do anything about something that I don't know is a concern. So intentionally going back when we have to make changes or practices or difficult decisions, connect that back to the data of what students or teachers have shared with you about a concern or an area of growth. Being intentional to connect those dots, because if we leave it to folks just to connect the dots independently, they may not make the direct connection that I'm trying to make as a building leader as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned some of the surveys that we also lifted up in our previous episode in terms of like the Panorama survey or the teacher working condition surveys or the student surveys. by chance, are there any outside of those surveys ways that you collect perception data? Or are those the primarily formal ways that you do perception data?
Yeah, good question. I've instilled a practice here at Combs that we do a mock teacher working conditions abbreviated version every quarter.
Oh,
And so that is something that we instill. So the questions are not new. It also allow the opportunity for staff to have an open-ended question, to ask specific questions or statements of feedback. And then I'll copy and paste those in my weekly newsletter to staff
Ooh.
to then answer those.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
it is building that capacity that your voice is heard.
Mm-hmm.
I think perception data for students, it's a common practice here in our students' agendas that they do a self-reflection every day and they do use the tool plus delta. Pluses are things that went well. Deltas are not negative, but it's a symbol for change. What can you change about your
Mm-hmm.
next day? And so I think it is more anecdotal data, so to speak, but it is that perception of the child of how their day went within their classroom. And collectively, the classes also do a plus delta at the end of the day. And it's a way that they start the next day within the morning meeting context. So they can review what went well, but what are the opportunities for growth? So I think those mindset shifts are so integral in really understanding how do we put data, particularly that perception data, into practice.
I like that. And that it makes me think a little bit of, I don't know, student learning data, how you have summative, interim, and formative assessments. And we wouldn't want to just wait for the EOGs and EOCs to get a sense of how we're doing. So by doing it quarterly, you're able to see progress over time and you can try
That's
a
right.
thing and then see how it like moves the needles. And also that piece of just perception data locally as compared to what the state or district pushes down gives you the option of those open-ended questions. Like we can't do that with our student survey just because there's so many students, but locally you're able to get some of that qualitative data to put next to the quantitative data.
For us doing it quarterly, we embed that within our SIP data reviews every quarter. So not only are we looking at achievement data, but we've got live and tangible perception data that we can also review within the context of those meetings too.
One of your points or examples that you gave about the classes doing a plus delta at the end and then looping back is a really great example of one of the strategies or best practices that we talked about in the last episode about looping the feedback. And I think that is, thank you for that practical example of how you loop back after you've given the, the purpose and you've talked to your audience, how you loop that back so that they can effectively see their role in the change and the importance of their feedback moving forward.
100%. 100%. I think it draws the connections intrinsically, but also extrinsically. Yes. And again, goes back to that word intentionality, which I think is so key in how you set up the structure to respond to the data that's been shared.
So you sort of gave an example about process that you have in place to make the data accessible. Like you talked about how you take some of the items from the teachers and you put it in your weekly updates. Are there any other processes that you put in place to make that data accessible to either, students or parents and actionable?
Well, I think it serves many multiple purposes, right? I think sharing data and percentage of completion, like we talked about before. I think also giving concrete opportunities that have grown over quarters if we're continually pulse checking them, but where have there been some declines? And if there has been a slip in one specific area, digging in with more of our leadership team of help me understand the why. Why has this happened? How can we work within our circle of control to impact this in a positive way?
I'm sort of thinking about, like your example talked about how you make the data accessible for teachers, but I'm wondering, so for your panorama survey, how do you make that data accessible to teachers and staff? How do you make the student, because they don't get to see that data. They can always go back on the TWC website to see, their teacher responses. But how do you make the other perception data accessible to like staff?
I think a key token, I think many schools do this already. You know,
Mhm.
when you start off the year, you paint the picture of where your areas of focus are based
Mm.
on the data.
Yeah.
So when we gather together in the summer with our leadership team, when we welcome our whole staff back on campus, you know,
Mhm.
we're setting the tone and the climate for the year in our actions and again, our areas of focus. But I think also having that key component, reviewing all aspects of data, including those perception pieces of data, is so important, right? Data paints a picture. It
Mm.
helps paint the story of where we've been, but also where we're going. And so if teachers are not aware what parents' perception may be, if teachers are not aware of what students' perception may be, they may not understand why we may have certain areas of focus or what work can we align within our school improvement plan to provide an even greater
Mm.
understanding of X, Y, or Z
Mhm.
based off of that data. So, how am I using that to build capacity of our entire staff to really understand what the data looks like from all stakeholders? And we're not just making those
Mm.
decisions only on the achievement data that's
Yeah.
been given to us.
Yeah, I like that point, putting them alongside each other, because then without that perception data, you might just be kind of trying to solve the wrong problem. If you're only
That's
looking at
right.
student learning data, you might then kind of think like, oh, we got to do this, or this differently in terms of like the instruction and assessment, when it might just be that something that would be that would rise out of the perception data. It might be that students do not feel comforted and welcomed and those kind of things. And their amygdala is being tripped so that you can have the best teachers with the best instruction, the best curriculum. None of it's going to matter if their amygdala is being tripped. So I love that, putting the perception data alongside student learning data.
100%. I think it tells the whole story, right? You
Yeah.
can't just read a book and skip chapters along the way. You've got to really read it thoroughly to get the gist and the main idea. And I think that's what the perception data really does for us at the school level.
So you've been doing this for a while, and the way you use your perception data, as you said, is intentional. Can you give us and our listeners a specific example of how you used perception results to improve what was happening at Combs?
I think one thing that we have really tried to strengthen, and particularly in the past couple of years, is really tightening our system for communication to our families,
Mm.
right? I think communication's often like homework. You
Mm,
can give too little or you can give too much.
yeah.
Hard to find that sweet spot, right?
Mhm.
And really knowing that our families are saturated with communication
Oh.
in so many different ways, as far as text, email, talking points, web pages, social media. There's so many different avenues that you can receive communication from that
Mhm.
saturation. And so there was some feedback given to us within the panorama of how do we streamline that and make it useful and successful. So, one thing that we've created a one-page flyer for families that has all the links that you may need as a parent, from links
Ooh,
to the
yeah.
My School Bucks account to paying for field trips. How do you get to Wake ID? All those nuances that can be challenging, right?
Yes.
At the top, we have a place for the child's name and student ID number. So it can actually be a magnet that stays
That
on
is
the
in
front.
your fridge.
Oh,
Yep.
that's smart. Yeah.
Oh,
So
that's nice.
that has been very useful, very intentional. We received the feedback, but then brought it back up in a principal's chat of tell me more what would help with this. Another way that we really work to streamline communication, we are intentional in crafting the weekly message that goes
Mhm.
out to families on a Sunday afternoon.
Mhm.
But we also backtrack that and we share that weekly message with our staff on Wednesdays and call it What
Mm,
to Share Wednesday. So staff members are able to use and preview what's going to come out in Sunday
Yay.
and how can they copy and paste, work smarter, not harder, and put that in their weekly newsletters.
Oh, nice.
So parents aren't getting different messages and different information. But again, it's that streamlining. And I will say we've had great success and great positive feedback from all stakeholders. It lightens the load a little from our teachers that they're having to remember everything. But our parents, they'll see the information in the weekly message that comes from School Messenger, but they're also seeing that information within their classroom newsletters and talking point messages too. So again, that alignment, I think, from both of those avenues has been very successful.
That's interesting. I like that approach. So when this episode airs, we'll be in the middle of the window for schools to complete the student engagement survey. So why would you recommend that schools embrace this piece of perception data?
It's very important for schools to embrace this because our students are our main stakeholder within our school community. I think a lot of times we are focused on, particularly at the student level, what the achievement is. But I think helping understand where there are strengths within the classrooms, but where there are opportunities to grow as well. I think for me, I really love to tease out the student survey data by the subgroups, because I think I have had some ahas of how various subgroups have different perceptions than majority subgroups have. And it's brought a level of awareness to me that it may not have been as crystal clear in my day-to-day operations if I didn't have that data to really dive into to know how can I make justifiable change to really impact all children and not just a few children.
I like that. That's good advice. And I think that applies to all the different ways that we might collect perception data from teachers, from family, from communities, all that. Yeah.
That's right.
So if there's a new administrator listening, what's one piece of advice that you'd give them about gathering and using perception data?
I think I would offer the advice of don't be afraid to ask, right? Asking for perception data can take tough skin, but also knowing it's not about me. I believe wholeheartedly in the team mindset. People are going to air grievances and frustrations in any way that they feel like they can. But I also tell my staff and school community in general, if there's opportunities for us to grow, it's not just me that has to fix it.
Yeah.
We are all part of the opportunity to make changes. And I can't own all that. I can steer the ship and I can shepherd it. But if there is something that we need to do differently, we all are invested and involved in making the changes together.
I like that piece because, it is intimidating asking, but those feelings are going to come out one way or another. So I appreciate you keep using the word intentional, having an intentional and systematic way to invite that kind of feedback and that kind of information allows it to be, one, it's just welcoming, asking, makes people feel seen and heard. And then that just gives you a way to have that shared purpose with everyone to then, once you get that data, figure out what to do with it.
And Spencer, if I can add one thing to that, there have been times that people have submitted feedback that are things beyond my circle of control.
Yeah.
Or it's an awareness to me that I have not connected the dots of the why I've had to make certain decisions I have had to make. And so also using that as an opportunity to clear up any miscommunication or misinformation that someone has pieced together on our own.
Yeah.
It's Einstein's definition of insanity.
Yeah.
If we were staying in that cycle of thinking, oh, well, this is why we're doing this. This is why you're doing this. And then I read that and I'm like, oh, no. That was not the intention of this.
Right.
So how do I correct that thinking or provide greater information in that realm to hopefully lessen that animosity or frustration over a certain situation?
Yeah, I like that. And one of the things I feel like I'm hearing is collecting perception data might it begets other perception data because it starts you down a path of like, oh, I noticed this. What might I ask next to unpack it a little bit more? Like we scheduled this episode in April because that's kind of like survey season. You got the student survey, you got the DWC around there, you got Panorama, but when you're speaking of perception data, I'm hearing it much more formatively, the stuff that you do throughout the entire year, not just waiting till April and like, oh, that's when we find out what our students or teachers or families feel.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll add this one more thing I have learned over the years. When I do an end of the year survey for staff about feedback about their perception regarding scheduling, PLC days, so forth and so on, I learned very quickly I give those to PLCs to complete together rather than individual teachers, because then I know that PLC has had to come to a consensus. Sifting through 93 staff members to find the common thread is much more challenging than to sift through 7 or 8 PLCs that have had to answer it all together. So there is an opportunity on other times for individual teachers, certified and non-certified, but some of that end of the year information, I need to know what that team cohesively really decides in those main topic areas.
Yeah, and that feels like a kind of microcosm for our whole conversation that, perception data seems and like it should just be natural. You just ask people what they think and then they tell you. But I keep hearing this intentional, systematic way that you are gathering and analyzing and acting on this perception data so that it is welcoming for the participants and useful for you at Combs. So I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing those thoughts.
I also like how she highlighted that piece that we talked about, that it's a collaborative effort, right?
Yeah.
That's not just when you're thinking about the surveys or the perception data or creating the tool, but there's collaboration when we're thinking about the problem solving as well. So I like those two pieces. There's collaboration all throughout the whole cycle.
Yeah. So Principal Sexton, thank you for chatting with us about perception data today.
Well, thank you guys. And thank you for having me today. I really enjoy the conversation.
Thank you.
Of course. And thank you to Millbrook High School's Tremont Ponton for the theme music. And thank you to you listeners for tuning in. You can get some resources and a link to our website in the show notes below, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.